Hey, it's Jeff Timberello. I am the director of the Southwest Florida RIA, and I am joined by the other director of the Southwest Florida RIA, Michael Lyons. How you doing today, Mike?
Good, man. How's it going?
Good. So for those that don't know you, which I would be shocked if they don't, if they're connected with the RIA at all, but for those that don't know, tell us about you, your experience, and then tell us a little bit about your company and what you do.
Okay. Property management is the focus of what I do and what my company does. We manage several hundred units in Lee County, all of Lee County, from Cape Coral, Lehigh, North Fort Myers, Bonita. I mean, any part of Lee County we go into. A little bit of Collier, a little bit of Charlotte County, but we stay in Lee County mostly. And that's our focus. And primarily, like I said, property management is our thing. We've done it for years. I've done property management personally for 17 years or so. And so right out of middle school, and just kidding. And but it's been a long time, and that's our focus. I mean, it's all property management. Of course, I'm a real estate broker, and we broker real estate, but it's all investment property for the most part as well. So that's a little bit about
you own some rentals too. Do you find that it's you enjoy managing your own too, or is it like more?
No, well, you know what? I think it gives you a good perspective. I think if you were to manage property and not own any, it gives you a good perspective of what owners deal with when they have expenses that come up, or they have a vacancy, or so that part actually, I know we'll talk about that in a little bit, but I would say if you're ever meeting with a property management company to discuss business, find out whether or not they own some, because the perspective of owning it versus just managing it, I think is different. So it's been good. I mean, at some point it's kind of all the same if you approach it the same way. So, I mean, it works out good. And of course, you already have the resources by managing a bunch of property that, for repairs and that kind of thing. So it's good.
So the focus of this video, we're going to talk about long-term rentals. You want to talk about, differentiation, or how different is it long-term rentals versus short-term rentals?
Sure. So from an investment side, I think long-term rentals is the way to go. I say that because I've seen the short-term or the seasonal rentals, and you got to build up clientele. I've done the returns, or kind of a breakdown on what the return would be on a seasonal rental or short-term rental versus an annual rental, and the returns aren't that great in my opinion. I think short-term rentals are great if you have a house that you want to visit and actually make it part of a vacation every year for you. It's an investment, obviously, but you can do some short-term rentals and offset the expenses you have throughout the year. But from a pure investment standpoint, there's no comparison in my opinion. Long-term rentals, annual rentals versus a home that you're going to pay a lot more money for, or home, condo, whatever it is for a seasonal rental. You're going to have to furnish it. You have to provide all the utilities. I mean, there's a lot to it. And to have that all flow with high occupancy, and then you start watching your numbers. If you've got a mortgage, you start paying your mortgage, your real estate taxes, your insurance, to make that cash flow and make it a good investment. I don't think it's good. That's just my personal thoughts on it. But if it's a house, if you live up north and you want to buy a house down here and enjoy it from time to time, and then offset your expenses, it's great. But actual return, for investment purposes, solely for investment, I don't think it's a good idea. I mean, you don't want to get in my opinion, you don't want to have 30 seasonal rentals as in your investment portfolio. If you have one or two,
it would be a lot of cleaning.
Oh, tons of cleaning, tons of cleaning, and here too we have the peak months. January through April are probably the best months, but even November, December, you can get some good occupancy for seasonal rentals. But half the year, for the most part, I mean, you can get it rented, but not at top dollar. So the return on it's tough. It is.
Okay, now we always talk about single families as rentals. What type of single family homes, from your experience, do you see that perform the best?
Good question. So if an investment property is purchased, a typical 3-2 is what most people are looking for. But to pinpoint what would be the best, you don't want a high-end 3-2. I mean, an expensive, you don't want to pay $350,000 with the intent to rent it on an annual basis. But I'm using numbers just in our market. If you can pick up a property, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, all tile house that you can get, $1,200 or so for, I just think you can. That's the most solid investment. I'm thinking a 3-2. I said concrete block. I would avoid wood frame as often as you can for a long-term hold, because there's obvious issues with Florida and wood frame homes. in newer, I would say not necessarily brand new, but I've got a lot of properties that I manage from 1960s to now, new stuff. And the older the property, obviously, the more issue you're going to have. If you were to buy one single family and it's an older home and you've got cast iron pipes, for example, to make it a long-term good property or rental property, do it right from the rehab from the get-go to avoid all the headaches you're going to come into down the road if you don't do it right. So, for example, an older home, if you want it to cash flow and you buy it at the right price, put a new roof on it if needed, redo the plumbing on it if it's the original plumbing and now it's 30, 40 years old. The most solid investments that I manage on the single family side are properties that are 15 or so years old, 10 to 15 years old, that are all well maintained. When there's an issue, there's no Band-Aid put on it, it's fixed right. And I've got some owners that do that for the properties, and they have the best portfolios by far. The least amount of turnover. They have a nice product because it's a nicer, little bit newer home, but not necessarily, not all the bells and whistles per se, but it's a nicer, newer home. And like I said, long-term tenants, that's by far the best. I don't know if that answers your question as much as single family. You have to do it right. You can't put a Band-Aid on it. And if you do that, you're gonna have a lot of turnover, a lot of headaches with tenants.
Now, how about say you're in Lee County, what areas do you see that kind of perform the best long-term?
Long-term, of course, it all depends initially on how much you're paying for the property. Let's say you picked up a house a few years ago, a 322, whether let's say Lehigh or Cape Coral. We had a bunch of those built back in the boom, and that's probably where you're going to find the most. You buy a 322 and 2004, 2006, 7, 8 built, not many 7 and 8, I guess, but 2004, 2006, and that's been the best, most solid rental. You can get good clientele if it's well maintained. Of course, those properties are about 15 years old now, so they're probably looking at a new AC system now and a new hot water heater, and if you haven't already done that. But you can get a good clientele, good tenants for that property, and not low income. And I mean, it's great. It'd be a great investment.
And what about, say you were to have to, pin one thing? What is the most critical thing if you want to be successful as a long-term investor holding rental properties?
Great question. By far, the secret to the whole long-term hold is getting a good tenant and being over the top when it comes to doing a background check. In our meetings, we discuss it all the time, but the more detail you put into checking their background, I'm checking for evictions, checking their previous rental, the previous landlords, checking their income, verifying all that, and not going off what's just put on an application. There's ways to verify those kind of things. And it being really, really detailed. I mean, it's as if they're applying for a mortgage. I mean, not exact same, but you go to as thorough as they do and you can get a good tenant. It's going off your gut or not really being thorough in the background that really can kill your whole investment. In a couple of months, I actually had a portfolio I just picked up, and within the last 6 weeks, and went out and looked at all the properties and had an issue at one of the homes, and we ended up they didn't pay, so we had to start the eviction process. They were in the property for 3 months, and they caused thousands of dollars in damage. And when they moved in, and they didn't do any background checks on them that I'm aware of when they moved in. So the wrong tenant can really destroy your investment, but the right tenant can be there for years, maintain it, treat it as if it's its own. That's how you are successful. By far, tenant's the secret to the whole thing, by far.
Now, what about leverage versus cash? Do you buy 10 with your money, or do you buy 2?
Good question. And of course, and that's the perspective of the person, how much cash they have. Some people are limited, but if you have the cash to invest, again, it depends on their circumstances. But in most cases, the most successful investors that I work with that are having long-term buy and hold situations, if they do leverage, they have a game plan to get that leverage paid off, or they're buying it cash. Now, obviously, I know that opinion can vary depending on their circumstances or what kind of money they have in the bank account. So that can vary. But I just would be really cautious about over leveraging and buying a bunch of properties where you don't have too much equity in them. So if something were to go south, you've got a problem on your hands. Like a lot of people dealt with years ago when the market crashed. I'm not proposing that's going to happen again. But whenever you can buy something cash and get a good return on it, I mean, how can you go wrong?
Yeah.
So taking some cash out, not over leveraging, and buying a few more with a little bit of leverage, absolutely. But having a fully leveraged portfolio, I would say that's not the best way to approach it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's while you can amplify your returns, you can also amplify your losses.
True. Yep.
It's the best way I know to put it.
Oh yeah, and I mean, being aggressive is great. Buying rental property and getting a bunch of them is great, but be smart about your, know your limits, know your income and your money and where it's going to be at, and have a game plan. But some people over leverage and they can get in a bind. You over leverage and you have two properties that need a roof, and you don't have the cash to do it. You have a problem in your hands. They can get worse and worse. And so anyway, just gotta be smart about it.
Now, how about vacancies? How long does it take to get something rented on average? I know the market, if we're having this discussion in 08 versus 2014, it's a much different market, but just kind of across the mean, which we did rent, and you and I were collaborating a lot then. We rented a ton of houses in 7, 8, 9, and 10.
Oh yeah. And right now, of course, it's 2019 now, but if you have a property that when you walk in, there's nothing that's obviously wrong, it smells good, it looks good, within 2 weeks should be rented. Now that's the standard, 3-2, 1-car, 2-car garage home, but within a couple of weeks you should have a tenant lined up to move in shortly thereafter. There's always an abundance of tenants. I've yet to be in a market where there's no tenants. You still have to find the qualified ones and spend the time to do the background checks. But within, I'd say about 2 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks max to have a property occupied again if it's presentable. If a property sit on the market for longer than that, or you're not getting the kind of activity, you could have an odd property, which few of those exist, but there are some. But if you're maybe throwing some paint on it and not fixing everything and trying to get top dollar for it, it's going to sit on the market. Mm-hmm. So to sum that up, if you do everything you're supposed to, tenants walk in, they can see it, it presents nice, it looks good, in a few weeks it'll be rented.
Now, how about eventually even sometimes the best tenants have issues. Eviction is the one thing that scares a lot of people from being an owner, landlord, whatever you want to call it. Say it actually comes time that you haven't been able to prevent the eviction. How long does it take, say on average, to evict a tenant?
3 to 4 weeks is about the time frame, unless they fight it, which few do, percentage-wise, very few do. But the easy answer, I guess, is 3 to 4 weeks, and the sheriff's showing up and, changing locks, and they're getting them out. So if they fight it, maybe 4 to 6 weeks. And ultimately, I'll mention this too. I mean, the goal is not to evict the tenant. You'd be surprised at how many times you start that process. They don't take it real serious. Then they get a document from the court on their door, and they scramble and get a hold of a family member or whatever and find the money and pay. And that's great. And you want to keep them in the property, but 3 to 4 weeks is about the time frame if you have to go through with it and they don't fight it. I've been to the court a handful of times where they've argued it, and the weird thing is if they haven't paid rent, there's really no argument, but sometimes they'll still just for whatever reason try to argue it. So that could drag it out a couple more weeks possibly, but if it comes down to paying rent or not paying rent, there's not much of an argument.
Yeah, what I learned the hard way was never do a 2-count eviction. The first time I went to evict somebody, I was really upset, mad she hadn't paid me. And I did the 2-count eviction, which is possession of the property and a judgment. And because you're asking for a judgment, they have a right to a hearing whether they've paid the rent or not. Mm-hmm. And I ended up elongating my vacancy that made me so mad in the beginning. And after that, I'm never do, I do a 2-count eviction. There's always a 1-count, just give me my property back.
Well, I'll mention this too, I think this is worth mentioning. Technically, as far as I'm aware of, I'm not an attorney, but as far as I know, they should not get a hearing on a normal eviction if they don't put money in the register at the court. And you'd be surprised in Lee County, there are times where
it still happens.
Still happens. They're not putting money. I got to go to one on Monday. They haven't paid anything in the court, and they gave them a hearing. So that part's kind of frustrating because that's out of our control. But generally speaking, if you are nervous about buying investment property because of evictions, there's really not much to it. If you've done everything on your end to cover yourself, and the goal is not to evict someone, it's to get their money paid and have the property maintained. You want to avoid evictions. Yeah. But if you have to, it's not a tough process. It really isn't. No.
So if you're a soon-to-be landlord or really circling the space to see if it's right for you, what legal issues should somebody be aware of before they deploy capital into that space?
I get a really good lease. I mean, lease is probably the most important thing that protects you. And then also, if you haven't read I don't know how many pages, it's pretty thick. I've read it a few times because I'm that dork that would do that. But the Florida Landlord Tenant Act, you need to know the rights they have, and then your responsibility as a landlord. Mm-hmm. And once you know those, I mean, it's long and boring, but the weird thing is I kind of like reading it. I want to make sure I know what I'm talking about. But if you read that, you know what you can and can't do. And if you follow it, there's no argument. I mean, there's documenting things. There's if it comes down to payment, it comes down to communication right now. Nowadays, with either email or text message, that kind of stuff's easy to record. But your lease needs to be rock solid. I would start there, and then know that the tenants do have rights. So, but all those rights are real clear in that. I mean, it's a very long document that goes in detail of so many things you probably wouldn't even think of. You read that and you're in pretty good shape.
Okay, now final topic here.
Sure.
You can go multifamily versus single family. You want to maybe have some comments on the difference between the two, and then and then the differences of the type of tenants you get, single family versus multifamily.
We approach it this way. From a cash flow standpoint, by far, multifamily is better. Duplex, for example. And recently, and I'm sure we'll do it at RIA again here soon, but recently I ran the numbers on, a single family home, a condo, and a duplex, and what kind of returns you're going to get. And under every scenario, obviously you have to buy it right, but the duplex is the higher return. And the occupancy for the duplex, when one side goes vacant, you still you're half full. And then when a single family home goes vacant, the whole thing's vacant. Mm-hmm. So from a cash flow standpoint, by far, I think duplexes are fantastic. You still have to buy them right. There's a lot of things you got to not go into too much detail. There's can be some headaches with duplexes, obviously. And then the same rule applies when it comes to doing background checks. Obviously, every tenant that applies has to be treated the exact same. You do the exact same background checks, the same qualifications for moving them in. But I've had great luck. I managed several duplexes, and there's not a huge difference. You just treat them the exact same, do the same exact background checks you would do with anyone else. And I've had tenants in duplexes for 6, 7, 8, 9 years. I mean, like long time, no turnover, and they're great tenants. They take care of the place, and they're happy to be there.
Now, question on a duplex: do you just have the lawn mowed, or do you get one of the tenants to mow the lawn, or do you have the tenants mow their half of the lawn?
Yeah, and I recommend, obviously, from a landlord standpoint, you want to cut your expenses wherever you can. On a duplex or multifamily, I'm always, I would say, have the landlord handle the yard, just because that fine line between where's your yard start, mine stop, that kind of thing. And on a side note too, if you have any properties, and I don't recommend investing in pool homes for rentals, but that happens, I would have the landlord pay for a pool too, just so you have a professional maintaining it, because a tenant who says they know how to maintain a pool does not know how to maintain a tool necessarily. They might know how to do it, but if they don't, they can do a lot more damage than the $65 a month it would take you to have a professional maintain.
Here's a pro tip for pools. Learned recently, if you've taken the water to pinch a penny, you have to get it tested within 3 hours. Not like I rode around for 2 days with it in my truck and then went to pinch a penny, and they were trying to tell me I needed added 4 gallons of muriatic acid to my pool.
Yeah. I mean, like, so someone that doesn't know what they're doing could really mess up your pool.
I think I just said I don't know what I'm doing with my own pool.
Yeah. But from a professional standpoint, for both the lawn on a multifamily, I'd have a professional go there, or a lawn service go there. And then for pools, they got to know what they're doing. And a lot of people, I'll take care of the pool. They want to save however they can, but I wouldn't recommend it.
How about water systems? Because that can really damage the plumbing if it's not done right.
Well, you said well equipment?
Yeah.
I have a lot of property that we manage that has well equipment, and I have owners that will hire a professional to maintain it on a monthly basis, or about every 4 to 6 weeks they'll come out, put salt in, and make sure everything's, nothing's corroding or any issues there. And they, quite honestly, they still have issues with their well equipment because just the sun and elements is gonna affect well equipment, but they have the best circumstances. They have the least amount of problems compared to someone who doesn't maintain it normally. So I'd recommend it. It's about $35 or so, $40 every 6 weeks to have a professional come out, service it, check it, make sure your aerator tank's clean, and that's money well spent, in my opinion, if it's every 6 weeks for $35 or whatever the cost is approximately. So I would do that on a long-term rental. I would do that because if you plan on the tenant to take care of it, some do and some don't. and you're better off with at very little expense, in my opinion, to have it maintained. You avoid a lot of problems.
So, Mike, if somebody's got questions or they'd like to talk to you about your services, how would they get in touch with you?
Appreciate that. So our website's www.lionsrealestateinc.com, which I'm sure we'll put somewhere on this video. And then I put my personal cell phone number out there for anyone who wants to call me. But my cell phone's 239-560-6164. That's direct line to me. And then my email, I'm sure we can post it somewhere, but it's mike@lionsrealestateinc.com.
Cool. And again, for the Southwest Florida RIA, we're the two guys that direct it. If you haven't been to a meeting, this is the kind of stuff we discuss. We're not trying to sell you $5,000 weekends and all that cool stuff. We just talk about real estate because that's what we do every day for a living.
Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, man. All right.